Good afternoon from Cooperstown, New York. A beautiful day here in Cooperstown, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And we welcome you to our latest online program. This is part of a series, Ask the Expert, with our senior curator, Tom Schieber. And today, Tom and I will look at a very important process here at the Hall of Fame. It is called artifact acquisition. We're going to look at some specific artifacts and talk a little bit about some of the ins and outs in acquiring these different items that are obviously a vital part of the Hall of Fame's collection. We do welcome to the program Tom Schieber. Tom, thanks again for being with us. And I know this is a favorite topic of yours, and it's one that you're involved with, but also a lot of other folks are involved with here as well. Tell us a little bit about that, Tom.
Sure. So, as a museum, we need to acquire artifacts in order to fulfill our mission. That's part of our mission. And we've been doing this since even before our doors first opened, because you can't open a museum and have nothing in it and say, hey, would you mind donating something so we can put something in here? So well before the museum opened to the public, we were acquiring artifacts, and that process has not stopped and really shouldn't stop, because that's how we make a connection with our visitorship, is telling stories through objects. And anybody who's seen any of our Ask the Expert curatorial sessions knows that's a broken record of me, is how we tell stories through objects, items, ephemera, whatever the case may be, to make a connection.
A lot of the staff members are involved in this. I am not one of them. In fact, I've been told specifically, Marcuson, don't ever accept an artifact. We don't trust you. But there are other people they do trust. Tell us about some of those folks, Tom.
Sure, and actually, it's nothing personal, Bruce, because we the way it works is we have various staff members who work on that. But it's, and we'll get to this later, but it's never a single individual. So it's always a group making a decision. But those staff members are, our curators are very involved in acquiring artifacts. Library staff, collections staff, obviously, they're the ones who are taking care of the objects. But public relations staff is critical to the process. At times, members of our senior staff will be involved in this. And we'll get to talking a little bit later about the committees that work together. But there's lots of different staff members. And sometimes it can be random staff members that are involved to some extent. But I do want to stress it is a group effort.
We're going to approach today's program with kind of a basic format: who, what, where, how. We're going to take that kind of approach. So let's begin, Tom, with the question of who. Who exactly donates artifacts to the Baseball Hall of Fame? It's, I guess, a pretty diverse body of donors.
Bruce, it is. It's almost anyone you can think of. Now, some of them are pretty obvious. You'd think, well, artifacts come in from baseball players, for example. That would be something you'd think. And actually, our lead picture here shows two members of our staff, John Shestakowski, who's our VP of Communications and Education, and our president, Tim Mead, on the right, and they're with Steven Strasburg of the Washington Nationals. So this is after the World Series last year, 2019 World Series, when he donated this jersey from Game 6. And eventually he became, he won that game and sent it to a Game 7, which they obviously won, and he was named MVP. So that's sort of probably the most obvious thing, is we must get artifacts from players, but also from teams. And as a matter of fact, that particular donation of his jersey came from both, is a joint donation, which is not uncommon at all here. That came in from Stephen and the Washington Nationals. But we also have donations that come in from player families. For example, we got a lot of artifacts from Lou Gehrig, but Lou Gehrig's mother donated objects to us, and Lou Gehrig's widow, Eleanor Gehrig, donated objects to us as well. And as I mentioned, teams send objects along. One that I think a lot of people overlook is media members. And if we can go to the next slide, you can see a picture of a guy named Bill George, who is the official scorer for the AAA Pawtucket Red Sox, and he visited rather recently, actually, and took a look at a donation he had made a while ago, which was his scorebook, his official scorebook from the 33-inning game between Pawtucket and Rochester in the middle of 1981. And so there's a media member who actually donated an object. What a wonderful scorecard that is. It's, from the longest professional game, 33-inning game in organized baseball. And it's a wonderful thing because it's a total mess, right? Because it's 33 innings. It's hard to make that clean, but that actually helps talk about it. We get objects from collectors. So they're doing their own collecting, and sometimes they donate things to us. And from fans. This is a baseball that was donated to us by a young man named Eli Hyde. This is the baseball that Albert Pujols hit for a solo home run for his 2000th RBI. That happened back in 2019 in September, as I recall. I believe it's September. And, what a wonderful, generous thing to do. He caught the ball. And as a fan, he wanted to share it with the public. And we get hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, except, as you might have guessed, this year we had special circumstances, obviously. But, all of these people, fans or collectors or the teams or the players or family members, whatever, there's a generosity. They want to share the story. And that makes all the difference in the world for us, because that's what we want to do as well.
Let's talk a little bit more about these three artifacts that we've put up here on the screen. And we'll begin with Eli Hyde, a fan. I imagine somebody with the Angels approached him about donating the ball. Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
I believe he approached us, actually, and I misspoke. It was not September, it was May when the Pujols reached the 2000 RBI milestone. But what's really cool, Bruce, is that we get donations that come in all the time, and donation offers that come in all the time. But he came in with it himself. He came here with his family, and with the ball, and presented it to Tim. Now, our president, Tim Mead, was for decades with the California / Anaheim / Los Angeles, now Los Angeles Angels. And so that was a really wonderful connection as well, that I think that Tim was very thrilled about. Tim's rooting for all teams now that he's working at the Hall of Fame. But when you're with 4 decades with the Angels, you can't help but feel great that we got something like that, and an important story to tell about our pool. So Eli came here and wanted to come here, not only to visit the museum, but to make this donation.
And how do we know that this is the right ball? Not that we want to say that we're not trusting Eli. He's a good guy, and he obviously is presenting us with the correct ball. But how were we able to check that? Was there a way to know that?
Well, there was definitely news stories at the time about him catching the ball, and so that was critical. Everything else matched up. We always do our due diligence on matching up. Whether it's there's all sorts of forms of research that we do, and I know we talked about that in a previous session, but we did the same for a walk-in donation. If there's a donation, we want to make sure we feel good about it, and so that's what we do.
Yeah. Let's go back to the item that was donated by this gentleman, Bill George, which I think is particularly fascinating. This was a 33-inning game, but it actually involved 2 separate dates because there was a curfew. The game was suspended, and then everybody had to come back, including Bill George, to continue scoring the game. I hope he received overtime for that effort. Now, did he donate this initially back in '81, right after this happened?
Yeah, he did. It was in 1981 that he made the donation. And it's actually, you can see a replica of it. We used to have it on exhibit, but we felt that it was important to that after a while we need to take it down from exhibit because we were concerned about conservation issues with lighting, but they have a replica of it that's up in our One for the Books exhibit about baseball records. And actually, totally separately, but wonderfully, we have the bat that Dave Koza used to end the game, mercifully, in the 33rd inning. But yes, the game ended. I mentioned the date. I think I mentioned the date of June 23. That's the day that the game ended. Actually, believe it or not, Bruce, there's 3 dates involved, right? So it started on April 18th. It went into past midnight, so it was also played on April 19th. Yeah, and then they finally called the game and continued playing on June 23rd. So, all told, it was over 8 hours of baseball, spanning, I guess, technically over 2 months, but of actual playing time, it was over 8 hours of baseball. So, yeah, I mean, good for Bill for being there and doing the whole thing and donating it to us. But these poor players, and think about the umpires and everything that's a tough game that turns out to be over like 3.5 games worth of time, really.
Was this the first time that Bill saw the card after donating it?
I don't know, but I believe so. I think it was just within the last year or two that he came out. So it's maybe even just the last year. But I believe it was the first time that he did come back to visit. Remember, Bruce, this is going to make us all feel very old here, but that's almost 40 years ago. Next year will be the 40th anniversary. Is that crazy?
I was all of 16 back then. Incredible. Let's go back to the Strasburg. This is a great moment, obviously, in baseball history from last year's World Series. The Nationals are going back to Houston for Games 6 and 7. And given the Astros' dominance at home, not many people gave the Nationals much of a chance. So Strasburg, he's literally back against the wall here, and he pitches a great Game 6. So he donates the jersey from that game. And he was also pretty important throughout the regular season as well. He won 18 games. He led the team in innings pitched, 209. So then he wins Game 6, 7-2 to force a deciding 7th game. Now, it's interesting, the notation here is this is donated by both Strasburg and the Nationals.
Right.
Is that typically how it works with a player donating part of his uniform? It's a joint effort, usually, player and team?
Correct. Almost always. There's certain portions of the uniform that are actually outright owned by the player, and other ones that are not. And so it's usually both have to be involved in the donation. But yeah, it was a great game. It was obviously it's a must-win in Game 6, and he came through in spectacular fashion. But remember, in that World Series, the home team lost every game, right? It was sort of the opposite. I think that, am I right that it was the Cardinals Twins World Series in '87 was the home team won every game, I think.
That's right.
And so this one was they reversed that curse, I guess. So I guess going into Game 7, you figure, well, we've got a pattern going. We can do this. We've done it before, obviously. So they did.
Now, Tom, all 3 of these artifacts are, in a sense, no-brainers. These are things that we would definitely want to have. A uniform from Strasburg in a World Series, official scorecard from a 33-inning game, longest game in minor league history. Albert Pujols' 2,000th RBI ball. So these all make a lot of sense. But then there are lots of other decisions that are maybe not as conclusive. And that's where something else comes into a factor. There's a lot of people that are involved in making decisions as to what artifacts to collect. And there's something called an Accessions Committee, which you're on. Tell us about that committee.
Right. So we do have, actually, as it turns out, we have 2 committees. And for historical reasons, basically what happened was at one point in our history, in the history of our museum, we decided to split our collection into 2 different collections. One is a collection of objects that are the primary purpose is for display, like a jersey or a ball or shoes or a trophy, that kind of thing. And then the other collection is things that are more likely for research or a direct understanding of the game, whether it's books or ephemera, letters, photographs. As it turns out today, I think of both of those collections as viable for display. We display books, we display letters, certainly display photographs, or at least reproductions of photographs. But, and then also I do research all the time with three-dimensional objects. I use them to better understand history. I've researched the glove, not because I was going to display it, but because I needed to better understand a story and understand glove making, for example, or the seams on a baseball, how that's evolved. So for my purposes today, and I think for the rest of the curatorial team, we don't really worry about which collection something's in. We just want to make sure we have access to it, can utilize it in whatever way is necessary. But for historical reasons, we did split it up. So we actually have two accessions committees, one for each of those collections. So there's the 3D collections committee, which is actually meeting even as we speak. I'm missing that meeting. That's how important you are, Bruce. But I've already sent in my thoughts on objects that are being offered. And then there's a library committee that discusses objects that would go to the library collection. And we decide as a team, we discuss the pluses and minuses of objects and items, and we ultimately make a decision. So those are the committees that the main committees. There is actually a third committee that I want to make sure I mentioned. That's informally called a Milestones and Records Committee, and we meet regularly, most especially right before the season, throughout the season, and that is where we're looking ahead at stories that we know are happening or going to happen or likely going to happen. So we can't predict when a no-hitter is going to occur or when someone's going to have a home run game. But we can say, hey, this player is approaching his 3,000th hit, or a certain other individual is going to reach some set a record or something like that. If we see these things coming down the pike, we will say, hey, maybe we can talk with a team or the player or their player's agent or whatever, and see if we can say, hey, by the way, we know you're on the cusp of this important event. Would you think about donating something? And I should reiterate, it's always a donation. That's been the case since, like I said, even before we opened our doors, when people like Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb donated objects to us. They did not ask for us to purchase that. And that was, we have kept that tradition of everything coming in through donations, whether it's a player, whether it's a family member, whether it's a fan, whatever the case may be. So when we do have this Milestones and Records Committee and we see various milestones, we say, oh, let's see if we can get something here. It's always a request. We're not telling anyone to do something. It's a request. So those are the three committees: the three-dimensional object committee, a library committee, and a committee that sort of was looking ahead specifically at the current season, though not necessarily Major League season. It might be other things as well, minor league or baseball in Japan or Korea or whatever.
Now, Tom, with these accessions committees, you each vote. Is it a simple majority? Do you have to have more of a consensus than that in accepting an item? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a simple majority. We have to have a quorum. We have to have at least a certain number of people there, or at least represented in some way. So when I sent in my notes that I've represented, I'd rather not miss it because I like to be part of the discussion. The discussion is really, really great. And I will have one opinion and might change my opinion after someone makes a great case for why we should or should not pursue something, or why we say thank you or thank you, no thank you. So it is simple majority. I have to say that the vast majority of the time, we don't really need to take a vote. We're all thinking of it along the same lines. It's pretty rare that, I wouldn't say rare, it's not particularly common where one person or two people might disagree. And it's really rare when we realize, wow, we're just going to have to actually vote on this because it might get pretty close. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, the ones where it's really, really close, you'd be surprised at what they're about. They're usually about something that isn't particularly obvious. If it's an obvious thing, like a 2000th RBI ball from Albert Pujols' record there, or a milestone, that doesn't take a lot of brain power to figure out what we're going to do with that. So it's ones that are a little bit more subtle, and I think people would be surprised. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I think people would be sort of find it humorous what it was that we actually went down to a vote on.
Interesting. So we've talked about the who in terms of who acquires, who donates. Let's talk about the what. What kinds of artifacts do we acquire? And here is something topical. This is from this recently concluded 2020 season. Here we have a cap, Lucas Giolito, Chicago White Sox. Tom, if you would tell us the story behind this item.
Well, when you ask what do we acquire, well, one of the things we acquire is objects from the current season. So that's, and as I mentioned, we have this committee that's looking ahead, but obviously if it's a no-hitter or unassisted triple play or something like that, you don't know when that's going to happen. And so in this case, this was the first no-hitter of the season, and we try to get things from no-hitters. So right after it occurred, I think it was John Shestakowski, our communications director, contacted the White Sox. Usually, I got to say, most major league teams, if not all, already understand. They know that they've heard from us before, and they know, that's a milestone. Sometimes when we ask for an object, they're kind of surprised. They think, oh, really? Didn't think that'd be of interest, or we didn't even realize that was an important moment. Thank you for telling us that. But this is kind of one that's an expected request, and usually that goes pretty well. It's not a surprise that you're hearing from the Hall of Fame. So that's an in-season request. But then we also get artifacts from the past. And if we go to the next slide, you can see this is one that is a trophy that was donated to us. I can't recall the date that it was donated to us. But it certainly was well after the event, because this is a trophy that was given to Sam Thompson, great slugger, who in 1895, the Phillies actually held a contest throughout the season asking for fans to vote on who they felt was the most popular player. It's a most popular player award. And it was just Philly fans that would write in. And after the season ended, they counted it all up, and Sam Thompson, who it was kind of had a great season. He batted just under 400. He had 18 homers, which by the way, 1895 is a lot of home runs. Mm-hmm. And he won this, what's known as a Loving Cup. It's a silver trophy. It was handed down in the family. It was donated by a family member. So this is an example of an object that came in, not from the player, but from their family. It's actually, you can see it on exhibit right now. It's in our Taking the Field exhibit about baseball prior to 1900. And it's really gorgeous. Silver is a wonderful metal. It tarnishes, which is not a good thing, but when it's carefully shined up, it looks great until it tarnishes again. But when it's shiny, it just knocks you over. It's so bright and beautiful. And this is just a gorgeous piece. It is, let's think about this, Bruce, it's 125 years old. Is that right? I think I did that math right. 1895? Yeah.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got things from the current season that come in. We acquire artifacts in the past. But then also, there's the obvious things of artifacts that are related to the game on the field. So that might be shoes or a cap or a glove. But sometimes there's objects that are donated, but they came from off the field. They used to be on the field. And one, I don't have a picture of it, but one that's a great example is we got a baseball that was used in a game at Ebbets Field. The Dodgers hosted the Cardinals on August 2, 1938. Now, this is an otherwise completely nondescript game, except in that game, this is a regular season game, by the way. The Dodgers experimented with special yellowish baseballs. They're not pure yellow, but they were a yellowish baseball, thinking that would be easier for players to see. And one of the balls, I'm sure many balls went into foul territory and fans kept. But this fan kept this ball and handed it down in the family, and then it got donated to us. So, here's a fan donating something that was on the field at one point, but obviously was collected in the stands. And then there's always a huge collection of things that are not directly game used. So what you're looking at right now is not a game used item. This trophy was after the fact. It has nothing to do with what's a player used on the field or a team used. But, so if it's awards or it's scorecards or programs or books, all these kinds of things that would go to our library collection, including audiovisual materials, whether it's a cassette tape of an oral history or a record album that was on sale for Tigers fans after the 1968 World Series. Pop culture items, we got a fantastic item recently from a woman who worked with the Pittsburgh Pirates in the 1950s and 60s, and she kept all of her press pins from All-Star games and World Series and other events, and she fashioned them into a charm bracelet. And that eventually got donated to us. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. Great connection to the fan and pop culture. And actually, Bruce, if you go to the next slide, this is one of my most favorite, and it just came in this year when Dr. Fauci, who's the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, testified at a hearing back in late June of this year in Washington, D.C. He wore this face mask that had all sorts of Washington Nationals logos and words on it. That's handmade, actually. And we thought, well, this is, we love it when it talks about baseball, but we love it when baseball can also talk about more than just baseball. And this is a great object to talk about. You see this object, we're talking about 2020, we know we're talking about the pandemic, and yet there's a connection to baseball. And there's a lot of these that are out there where fans can wear their favorite team on a COVID mask. And we just thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if Dr. Fauci would be willing to donate his? And he was. He's a big baseball fan. He's actually a Yankees fan. He's a New Yorker, but he's been in D.C. so long, he's really adopted the Nationals as well.
Was this specially made for Dr. Fauci, or was this something that other members of the Washington Nationals organization also had?
No, this one is actually handmade. It's not one that was publicly available. You could go onto Amazon or go onto eBay or something like that. Now there are those that are like that, and I'm sure probably every major league team, I got to believe every major league team has masks that are for sale. But this particular one is not. So I can't recall the background behind how it was made, but it was not a commercially available one. But you know what? If it was commercially available, I still think it would be a viable donation. At the time when we requested it, we did not know that it was not commercially available. That wasn't the point. The point was that Dr. Fauci wore it at this time. Obviously, it's a connection to a bigger story. But another fun one that it's just another one of my favorites, and this came in quite a while ago. It's in the next slide, and that's the 45 record album called Go Joe Charbonneau. And for those of us who remember Joe Charbonneau bursting on the scene in 1980 and had an incredible rookie season, and then just didn't really pan out after that. And he was an incredible character. We think of Mark Fidrich as a great character from that era. But here's a guy who's playing every day and had all sorts of great stories about him, which would take up a couple of hours to tell. But he was such a big thing that they made this record called Go Joe Charbonneau. And so this was donated to us actually by the commissioner's office, believe it or not. So once again, tells a baseball story, allows us to tell various stories, but it's not necessarily the first thing that someone would think of when they said, oh, baseball artifact.
One of the reasons they did a single about Joe Charbonneau, not just because he was having a great rookie year, which he was, but he was also kind of a weird character. He would open up beer bottles with his eye sockets.
Yes.
and do other strange things like that might cause bodily harm, but he didn't seem to mind.
Yes. Uh, like I said, there's a lot of stories about that. He got a lot of fights when he was much younger, and he wasn't. His parents were not happy about him being in fights, so he had to hide it from his parents. But when you break your nose, it's hard to hide that. So he actually repaired his own broken nose with pliers. Don't try this at home, kids. But he caused some serious damage to his nose and sinuses, and had to have an operation that then actually allowed him to drink beer through his nose. So that was another wacky thing about Joe Charbonneau. Look him up, and you will enjoy reading about all of the wacky things that was Joe Charbonneau. But let's not lose sight of the fact that that was an awesome season. He was great and very beloved and a real character.
I have to ask you about the single. There's the word carrot on there. Do you know what that's about?
No, I'm not seeing that. I haven't seen it in a long time. It's on display, by the way. This is on display in our exhibit called Whole New Ball Game.
Okay.
So when you first walk in there, you can see it. But I'd have to take a closer look. I'm not up on that. Sorry.
And for those younger fans who have never seen a record album, this is called a single. I guess there might be a more technical name, but it has one song. You put it on a turntable, and believe it or not, when you put it on the turntable, the music does come out of it.
Yeah, it has two songs, but I don't know what's on the B side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I have to look that one up. I can't recall what's on the B side, but
Now I love this. It was donated by the commissioner's office of all things.
Right. And we do get things that come in from the commissioner's office. That's not uncommon. And then gets it to telling you, and hopefully you've gotten the message. Well, Bruce, I knew you get the message, but people understand we have a great relationship with Major League Baseball, whether it's the 30 Major League clubs or the commissioner's office, which is a separate entity. We have a great relationship with minor leagues. And we have to work those relationships. We have to make sure that we maintain those because they're obviously critical in acquiring artifacts. So thank goodness. Everybody, Bruce, we all come out ahead. Obviously, the museum comes out ahead having artifacts through which we can tell stories, which is what we do. But the teams come out ahead because it's actually good publicity for them. And it's good for them to know their history and to celebrate their history. And that's what we can do, quite frankly, better than anybody, basically, because the major league teams, some of them have their own museums and they do a great job, but it's not easy to be a museum, let alone on top of that operate a major league club and try and win ball games and make some money along the way. So it works out really well if the major league teams do what they're really good at, which is trying to bring fans in and trying to win some ball games and make it to the postseason, and let us help tell that story and us do what we do really well, which is collect, preserve, conserve objects, connect generations, tell baseball history, celebrate the greats.
Tom, next up on our list is the question of when. When did the Hall of Fame first begin to acquire artifacts?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of spoiled that. We started collecting in the mid-1930s, even before our official opening in 1939. We were open before that, but the official ribbon cutting was the centennial celebration in 1939. And we've continued ever since we first started in the mid-30s, and it's constant. A lot of people think that it must happen only at a certain, only during the season. It's like, no, we're meeting all the time about this. People are offering things all the time. And as an aside, but an important aside, we couldn't do it without all of these people who make these generous offers. And not everything is accepted. We can't accept everything. Not everything is either going to make sense for us to collect, or maybe we already have something that's identical to an object. We don't need 7 versions of the Go Joe Charbonneau 45 record, So it doesn't mean that it's not a valuable item. It just means that for various reasons we are not adding it to our collection. But boy, we love it when people offer things and think of us, because they're not just thinking when they offer things to us and they're thinking of us. they're really thinking about the hundreds of thousands of fans that come each year and the millions and millions that have come over the decades, and how this can be shared with them. So very thankful for that.
All right, next up, Tom, where do we get these artifacts? I know it's not just one place, it's a variety of places.
Right. So we talked about when Eli came out with the baseball, that's him coming in the museum. So sometimes the object is delivered in the museum. Sometimes we're given a heads up ahead of time, which is always best. But sometimes someone doesn't tell us. They just walk in and they say, hey, I'd like to donate this. I will stress, it's really great if before you bring anything and schlep something a long distance, email us or send a good old-fashioned U.S. Postal Service letter to us. It really works out best for everyone to discuss things ahead of time. It's just going to be easier. But then sometimes the object is actually acquired at the site where it did the cool thing that it did. So specifically, certain jewel events like the World Series or the All-Star Game or various other special events that the Major League Baseball or their Little League game that they do. Those are often acquired right there at the event, and then of course things come in through the mail, or like I said, by email or internet. Some sort of discussion that way, and then actually the actual object might come in digitally. If it's a digital object, maybe it can be sent. We're actually at times accessioning items that are just born digital and they exist digitally.
Will we ever visit somebody's house to take a look at an artifact? Maybe we get a word from somebody that they have this really important artifact. It's something that we're interested in, but we feel like maybe we need to go out there. Does that ever happen?
Yes, it's not very common. It's expensive to do, and we can't do it all the time. As a nonprofit, we're not going to have tons of money to travel around the country and looking that way, especially sort of without significant discussion ahead of time by way of telephone or email or letters. But there are some times when that's happened, especially when it's been large collections of lots of different things, and that can't be easily conveyed through a letter or through a telephone call or a Zoom call, for example. Yeah, that has been done in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised if it will happen again.
Tom, here's a question that comes up all the time from kids when we do our video conferences, our virtual field trips. Why do you collect all these things? It's a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. You need to maintain them. You need to protect them. You need to catalog them. Seems like an awful lot of work. Why do you do it?
Yeah, it is a great question. And it's a great question because it is what we do. That is actually part of our mission. It is what we are tasked with doing. So we're doing it because we have to. It's part of it. Now, we're also doing it because we want to, because it's the only way to really fulfill our mission, which is, telling these stories through objects. But it is actually in our mission statement, which is sort of our guiding light. I have a copy of the mission statement in my office, and that I look at all the time, or at home, just to remember, am I on course here? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And it's very helpful to every once in a while read it and go, yeah, this is what we should be doing, or yeah, this isn't really what we're about. We shouldn't be doing something. But a key part of that is collecting baseball artifacts. Those are actual quotes from our mission, is to collect artifacts, and we do it so. But the why, besides because we have to, is so that we can display objects and tell stories, so that we can preserve the objects. This is one of the reasons why sometimes we can do a better job than an individual can, because they don't have the wherewithal, the expertise, the funding. Not that we have tons of funds, but we have funds to preserve an object. So sometimes when it's at someone's house, they maybe not been taking care of it the way they should, and that means that eventually it may get destroyed because it's not being well taken care of. So that's something we can do. We collect so that we can chronicle the history of the game. So sometimes objects are collected and we are not displaying them. That's very common. And I know a lot of times people think, oh, I only want to donate something if it's displayed. Well, actually, you don't want to ever do that, because make that promise, because that can be harmful to the object, as I mentioned. We like to rotate objects if we can, and we'd like to preserve objects for as long as possible. And sometimes that means taking an object off exhibit. And when something is not on exhibit, that doesn't mean that it's not accessible. It's just being taken care of, and being preserved, and resting. And believe me, I tell people this all the time when they say, well, I don't want it to be down in your basement. So, well, there's all sorts of Babe Ruth items down in the basement. There's Ty Cobb items. There's Rogers Hornsby. There's Barry Bonds. There's Willie Mays. There's Yadier Molina. There's all sorts of objects that are not currently on exhibit. It doesn't mean that they're a lower echelon. It just means we're doing the right thing in preserving them. And then, actually, you mentioned it from the very beginning, Bruce. We also have a mandate to educate. That's a big part of what we're about, is educating. And that's obviously your shtick. And we have objects that are used by our education department. And then we actually have a special collection that is designated for education department use, which allows students to handle them and do things that you wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do with objects in our normal 3D collection. And obviously you deal with this all the time, Bruce.
The next question is how we collect artifacts, and you can divide this into two categories. One is reactive and the other is proactive.
Right.
Let's start with reactive.
Right, so we kind of touched on this earlier. So a lot of times you don't know there's going to be a moment that you want to preserve an item from that's going to happen. So for example, this bat is the bat that J.D. Martinez used to hit 4 homers in late 2017 when he was with Arizona. And you can see it actually at the top. There's a little tie around it. The white area closest to the knob is actually holding the bat together. It cracked there. We get a lot of cracked bats because ball players like to use a bat until it dies, especially if it's going well. And if you hit a 4-homer game, you're doing pretty well, I guess. So after that occurred, we approached JD and the Diamondbacks and asked if he would be willing to donate something, and he was willing to donate this bat once it died. So that's a reactionary request. Another one that I think is kind of fun is in the next slide, and this is from the 2006 World Series, and the story behind this is kind of neat. Now, the JD Martinez bat was kind of a no-brainer, and I think there's some emails back and forth amongst various people in the Accessions Committee, but we said, yeah, obviously, let's go for something, and a bat would be wonderful, and that's what the request was. In this case, this is from the 2006 World Series. Cardinals won that World Series, and I happened to be at the game. I was very fortunate to be at the game, and we had a representative from our PR department actually at the game, ready to collect things if they warranted. And we were texting each other. I was in the stands. He was in I think he was probably in the press box. He might have been down actually in the clubhouse or near the clubhouse at the time. But when we're getting near the end of the World Series, there, the last half inning, we were texting back and forth about what kind of things would make sense. And I suggested, let's get Yadier Molina's mask if he would be willing to donate it. And the reason I felt that was that, one, he had a great World Series, and he batted over 400, and he handled the pitching staff fantastically. And also, it was one of these hockey-style masks, which we had at the time. We had very few, so it could actually tell that hockey mask story besides telling a World Series championship moment story. So we went back and forth and talked about it, and we thought, yeah, this is a good idea. And happily, it happened. Listen, I'm telling you lots of successes. There's all sorts of failures as well that occur where we make a request and the person or says no thanks or no, or I want to keep that for my family, or I want to have that as part. I want to donate it. I want to auction it off and have that money go to a charity. We totally understand that, and that's why we're not asking for everything. We're asking only for key items. And the story I like to tell about this is the nice thing about baseball is that there's lots of objects that can help tell a similar story. So if we didn't get Yachty's mask, maybe we could get his shin guards, or maybe his catcher's mitt, or maybe we would get home plate from the Cardinals, or maybe a ball from the game. All of these objects I could use to tell this story that I'm trying to. There's certain ones that I think I would prefer, but there's lots of different objects that can help tell the same story. And that's a really wonderful thing about baseball. And I often tell people, thank goodness that I'm not working at the Sumo Wrestling Hall of Fame, where there's only really one object you would ever collect. And I'm not sure I'd even want to collect that. So you can really spread the wealth when it comes to baseball.
Yeah. Here's an item that is especially touching in a lot of ways. Pete Frates was a young man who was a star baseball player in college. Played in the Boston area. A very popular guy, but he developed ALS at a very young age. He had it for many years. He outlived his prognosis of how long he'd live by a number of years. Finally passed away about a year ago. It was December of 2019. But this is an item that tells us the story of that ice bucket challenge from 2014. Tell us more about this.
Right. So we talked about reactive requests, and this is actually a reactive request as well. And I think we'd also talked about proactive requests with that milestones and records committee, where we look ahead at an event that might occur and sort of tee things up and grease the wheels for a potential donation. But another one is we collect specifically for a known exhibit that we know we're going to do. So we knew we wanted to do an exhibit about the connection between baseball and ALS. And there is this really interesting connection, whether it was Lou Gehrig getting ALS, and actually now the disease is often referred to as Lou Gehrig's disease. Catfish Hunter, another great pitcher and Hall of Famer who passed away from ALS well after his playing career. And Pete Frates, who was a really good ball player with Boston College, and I think probably more importantly, a great person to bring awareness of this horrible disease. And since he started utilizing this ice bucket challenge concept, it had been around, but he took this over and applied it to ALS awareness. He raised over $250 million, and that is just stunning what this young man did. And as you recall, the ice bucket challenge was that if you the idea is to donate money, but also with the hook of, I guess initially it was if you don't donate money, you get ice poured over you. But it became all one thing, really. It was all mixed together about donating and undergoing the bucket of ice water pouring over your head. But what's interesting is that while he promoted this, and his family was fantastic in working tirelessly to help out with this, and his wife Julie, who was very involved the entire time. He himself had never taken the ice bucket challenge, so actually at Fenway Park, well after the craze had really been going, they decided to go ahead and do that ice bucket challenge, and this is the bucket that was used to pour ice over Pete Frates' head. Mm-hmm. And so we approached Pete and his family and said, would you be willing to donate some items? And we didn't really discuss this one necessarily particularly, but in back and forth discussions with them, this became a possibility. And actually, he was generous. He donated not only this and a couple other items from that ice bucket challenge, but also some of his baseball items from Boston College. And it was just it was wonderful. And so we included this in the exhibit. So another thing we do is not only are we reactive or proactive, but we're also thinking ahead about particular exhibits. We have an exhibit, we need to tell a story, and for whatever reason, our collection might be light on certain objects that we need to tell the story. Then we'll go out and request something.
We're going to start to take questions from our audience in just a moment. Before we do that, just a reminder that if you can support our programs and become a member, we certainly would appreciate that. Through the Hall of Fame's membership program, fans from around the country and around the world can be part of the team that is preserving the game's history and celebrating our all-time greats. Members do receive a full roster of benefits. That includes unlimited admission for a full year and also 6 copies of our magazine, Memories and Dreams. Be a part of something greater. Visit baseballhall.org/join. Again, be a member. Visit baseballhall.org/join. All right, let's get to some questions. Actually, first, a comment from Tom, a different Tom, and he points out that the word carrot is the record label name. So
Okay.
that was the single from the Joe Charbonneau song. And Carrot was the name of the company. That was the label, the record label. Thanks, Tom, for straightening that out. Interesting question from Mike Schwartz. Does the Hall of Fame ever try to track down exactly where an artifact is that they want? In other words, do you maybe have an idea of an historical artifact that you know is out there? It's not an auction. It's not that anybody's selling it, but you get word that maybe it could be donated. Does the Hall of Fame ever try to track something down in that process?
Well, sure. I mean, so, I guess I'm a little confused. So a lot of times people will offer something up, and so and we're assuming they've got it. Actually, they have to have it in order to donate it. But if the idea is like, well, we don't know where something might be, and we'd like to get something, and we do research to try and figure out where it might be, that has happened. Sometimes we blue sky it and we go like, here's the perfect artifact, but I don't know if this exists, or I don't know where it might be. And then we start to try it when it's really important. We'll go, oh, where we might be able to track it down. I'll give you an example, but it was a loan, but it's a similar concept, which was when I was working on an exhibit about baseball and the Olympics. I really wanted to have something from the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, where baseball was first played as part of an Olympics. Now, it was not a medal sport. It was an exhibition. But I also wanted to, if at all possible, try to get medals in this exhibit, because when people think of Olympics, the first thing they think of is gold, bronze, and silver, or gold, silver, bronze. And so I actually thought the object that would be coolest would be something from Jim Thorpe, because Jim Thorpe, who won the decathlon, was in that Olympics, but he also played baseball in that Olympics, something that's not particularly well known. And I thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could get the medals of Jim Thorpe? Now, for people who are Olympic historians, they know that his medals were stripped from him because he had played professional minor league baseball, not under an assumed name. He wasn't hiding anything. And at the time, they were extremely strict about this. And they said, no, as a professional athlete, even though baseball has very little to do with the decathlon, you are stripped of those medals. And he was. But then posthumously, they were remolded from the original molds. And I said, I wonder where these are. And so I researched it and I tracked them down, and was very lucky to make a connection with the USOC and with family members of Jim Thorpe's, and we got a loan that way. So we've done similar things with donations, but that's the first one that popped into my mind.
Interesting question here from Annie Lindsay. Do you ever have to weed out the museum or library collections for space purposes or other reasons? If so, do the same committees review and decide if something needs to go from the collection?
Right. So our collections policy, specifically with the 3D collection, I'll talk about 3D collections. So bats, balls, gloves, and trophies and things like this. There is no deaccessioning policy, which is not a very common thing amongst museums. Many museums do have some sort of a policy like that. We do not have a policy like that, which is why one of the reasons we're extremely cautious about accepting donations, because when we accept it, it doesn't mean that, I like to tell people, when we're accepting an object, that means we're not paying the very nice donor, but it doesn't mean we're not paying for that object, because we are promising to take care of that object, not for 5 years and not for 20 years, but as far as you can see. And that does take a lot of money. It takes money to pay staff to take care of things. It takes money and time and effort to preserve an item and to store an item in a climate controlled area, which is not for free. So we are making an investment in an object when we decide to accept a very generous donation. And we do it also thinking ahead with specifically regarding that question, is this the right thing that we want to make sure we're taking care of as long as we possibly can, not just for a short period of time. And that does affect our decisions because, yeah, we're not deaccessioning those objects. When it's coming here, it's staying here.
Final question from the audience. Can the public request to see an object that is not currently on display?
Excellent question. So a couple things about that. First of all, the answer is yes, you can request. It's not guaranteed that we'll be able to fulfill the request. And that's because of a lot of different factors. First of all, I should mention that we have a lot of our objects are available online through Pastime, which is our online catalog, which I will say has only a small percentage right now of our collection, but we are building it every single day. And so we're trying to get more and more of our objects up on the web so you can learn more about them and see what we have. But yes, you can make that request. The issue is that it's not simple to get to things, and it's certainly not simple for a limited staff to pull it off. So if you do make a request, certainly be aware that it's not going to happen, immediately. If you happen to be in the museum, that's pretty much not going to be able to happen. Like, we'll pull it up in an hour or something like that. So give us a lot of heads up. But even with a lot of heads up, there may be reasons why we can't bring it out. For example, sometimes things are not actually at our site. They've been loaned, or they're out for preservation work. We cannot get our hands on them, or they're at an off-site location. There's those issues. But additionally, there's certain items that are so fragile that, quite frankly, we don't really access them unless absolutely necessary. So there's all sorts of different reasons. But make the request. But just understand that the answer might be it'll take quite a while, or here's the reasons why we can't do it.
Tom, final question for me. If somebody in our audience wants to donate an item, what should they do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really, obviously, a very important one. If you own something, we're interested in hearing about it. Like I said, we don't purchase the artifacts. It just comes in from the generosity of people who love baseball and want to share its history and preserve its history and continue to make those connections with the fans around the world who come here. The best thing to do if you have an object that you think might be of interest is to take a high quality image or preferably images of the item. Your camera, your little cell phone camera, can actually do a pretty good job. But you really want it to be high quality. Really zoom in on all sorts of portions of it. Show parts of it that you think that may not be of interest, because sometimes it's the most subtle things that can help us better understand an object. Send along, whether it's by email or by US mail, a brief description of the object. We'd love to know its dimensions. Anything you know about it, what you know about its history, its age, the origin of the object, how you came to acquire the object. Of course, you have to send along your name and address and phone number and email address so we can get a hold of you. And you can send it to our registrar. And the address is at our website, but it's very simple. You can just say registrar. Those are the people who take care of those objects. National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, 25 Main Street, Cooperstown, New York, 13326. And if you email it, you can just email it to registrar, that's REGISTRAR, at baseballhall.org. And you know what? If you'd like to, please do so. And mention that you learned about it at this Ask the Expert program. That would be great to know. We'd love to know how people learned about donating objects as well. So, yeah, if you're interested, thank you, because honestly, we could not do what we do without the generosity of donors, period.
Very good, Tom. Great information. That's Ask the Expert, Artifact Acquisition, with our Senior Curator, Tom Cheever. Tom, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Bruce, and thanks folks for tuning in.
Yeah, we thank all of our participants, viewers, good questions that came in. We were not able to get to all of them, but we did get to as many as we could. We thank you for being with us here on this day here in Cooperstown. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.